Okay. All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the February 16th Committee of the Whole meeting. And welcome to all of our guests. It's the largest crowd I think we've had so far this year, so it's good. The city of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. So today, the purpose of this meeting is for the Committee of the Whole to discuss the scope, citing criteria, timelines, and next steps of the proposed Parksville Aquatic Recreational Center. And the CAO will present us with background and information for the committee's consideration. Please.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have a presentation that I think just provides a little bit of background and some introduction to, or I guess direction being requested for next steps. So if we just move to the next slide. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the background of the project to date. It has been underway in some form for almost all of this council's term. We're going to also talk about some of the considerations that council will need to turn its mind to over the next little while. I'm going to ask some questions, I guess, of council in terms of the project scope, what you're thinking or looking for in terms of citing criteria, talk a little bit about the timeline for the project, what consultation options we have now that thankfully it seems most of the COVID restrictions will be lifted in the near future. Let's hope. I think we also need to consider, or council needs to consider, how the RDN will factor into your next steps, and then talk a little bit about the actual next steps. As you mentioned, this is a committee of the whole meeting. And so the committee of the whole makes recommendations to council. So not really any decision-making power today, just a lot of opportunity for discussion and then recommendations for the next steps. So this council started the process or the discussion about a pool quickly after taking office. So in the summer, July of 2019, council adopted a strategic plan and specifically referenced its wishes to explore the feasibility and the ability to construct a new pool in the city of Parksville. In January of 2020, there was a portal launched on our Let's Talk Parksville site, and that currently still has all of the information to date on it. So anybody who's new to the project or wanting a reminder of what's happened so far, that's a great resource that has all of the staff reports, all of the consultant reports, tons of different information on that. And also there's comments and input from the public on that site as well. And that still remains active today. In March, there was stakeholder consultation workshops with a number of different user groups before COVID was a part of our daily conversation. We also had a council workshop. These were facilitated by a consultant, an architectural firm that designs recreational amenities. In April of 2020, the consultant released a needs assessment, which outlined that there was, or in their opinion, a need or demand for a new swimming pool and multiplex in the region. That document is also on the Let's Talk Parksville website, and it was presented to council in April and accepted by council at that time. And it then led into the release in October of some draft information to council, where council put some preliminary limits and concepts together. Basically established a $50 million budget for both a pool and multiplex, and a test site was identified, which has subsequently been rejected based on research from consultants. And a feasibility study was presented in January of 2021 that had some conceptual elements of what a rec facility like this could look like. And then we did some additional consultation with a facilitated group from May to October of last year, which was presented to council in the fall of 2021. So in December of 2021, council advised putting a bit of a pause on the project. We had finished with the consultants, we had provided some information to council, and we were entering into budget discussion. And so council directed staff to kind of pause everything until this meeting. So this is where we're at today. So we are at a pretty big decision point, and as we started talking about this several years ago, we mentioned that there would be a lot of these critical path points where council would be able to make decisions on what the project would look like, the timelines and where we're going. And at this point, we're actually in a position to ask council, are we still continuing on this path? Are we looking to do something different? We're kind of at a bit of a, not returning to square one by any means, but we're at a point where council has really any options in front of it that it wishes to pursue. So I think one of the critical things that council will need to consider and confirm is what the scope of this project is going to be, if in fact it is advancing. So at the moment, we have some direction from council that this would be a swimming pool and multiplex. The other option is that it would morph into just a swimming pool, or council could ask staff to look into more of a phased longer term plan where we're looking at a swimming pool and multiplex now, but when you're considering siting or even budgeting, you might be considering other amenities that would be part of this longer term plan. And so that could include things like future municipal infrastructure or the ability to expand to parks and trails or any other facilities that this council thinks we might need in the next sort of 50-year horizon. And then depending on what council decides or what the community suggests, the scope of the project obviously is very linked to the size of the site that is needed. And so I think another consideration for council is, are we looking for one site to put everything on one piece of property, or are we looking at the option for multiple sites? So one of the things that we were talking about at the staff level is it would be helpful, I think, to, if we're moving this forward, to understand perhaps siting criteria instead of picking, a particular site or one site that may or may not be available. We just don't know at this point. If there was some direction on the land size that we need, of course, linked to the scope that you would make decisions on as part of this as well. Does it matter to council, who owns the property? At the moment, we had sort of focused up until this moment on city-owned lands only. Is that still what council would like to see? Does it have to be within the city boundary, or is council looking to explore opportunities outside the city limits in surrounding electoral areas? Are the site conditions important? Certainly we saw that was important with the test site, but looking at other properties, are we wanting to eliminate properties that perhaps are treed and look only for properties that are cleared? And also, what does council think about the proximity to existing services? How important is it to you as a council that this, whatever site you choose, have existing services nearby? Obviously, there's cost implications, but not having the services doesn't mean that they can't be brought to the site. And then what about walking distance? A fair number of folks who participated in the consultation indicated that walking distance to their amenity is important to them. And I know we have a lot of high-level policy in our OCPs and other documents that say multimodal transportation and alternatives to the vehicle are preferred. So that's another thing that I think would dictate what site council prioritizes for this. So a very, very big caution on this map. I know that kind of hesitated even to put this map out there, but we did have, a fair number of sites suggested by members of the public throughout the consultation phase. And so you'll notice that these circles are very big because they're not really intended to identify a particular property, although they do kind of have properties were mentioned in the consultation. But I think what we need to talk with council, and maybe council wants to hear from the community even more, are some of these sites preferred over others? And so I think it's very important to stress at this point that council has not selected any of these sites. These are all just sites that were mentioned, some more than others. But I think hearing from council, the pros and cons, or maybe even council could ask staff to do a deeper analysis of, would any of these properties work? Are any of them absolutely off the table? They're all going to come with pros and cons. So I think there also could be many sites that are not identified on here that might be ones that the community or council would like to explore. So on the next slide, that actually is that it indicates some other areas outside of the city that are in the regional district. So if that's something that the community thinks is worth exploring, then there is an opportunity to broaden out the types of properties that might be available that would be outside the city's boundary. So some of the potential sites that were mentioned, and again, can't caution enough that none of these have had any direction from council. You haven't had an opportunity to look into these, but from the public comments that have been submitted to council and that are available publicly, these sites were mentioned, and there's some pros and cons immediately identifiable, but we would really want to do, I think we'd want to actually have a consultant do a deeper analysis based on council's direction as to what your preferences are. And some of these might be eliminated altogether, you know, based on if, for example, you wanted it to be city owned. Obviously, many of these are not. So if we just go to the next slide. So we do have some information on values. And so council has a list of assessed values, which is publicly available on the BC Assessment website. But the challenge with that is that some of these areas are, you would only, I think, need a portion of an existing property. And they all have different zoning. They all have different minimum parcel sizes. Some are owned by the city, so they don't have an assessed value. So it's very difficult without getting an independent appraisal to know kind of what the cost would be. The market conditions obviously change a lot. And from last summer, I would say this year more than any other year, the assessed values and market values are all over the place and hard to predict. A couple of the sites are multiple parcels, legal parcels, but council would certainly not need all of them. So that makes it a little bit more difficult to just extrapolate from the assessed value. So basically, when we look at all of those properties, again, reminding that some of them are city owned, so they don't have a value. The average was about $800,000 per hectare. And that's, again, with all the caveats that this is assessed and it might not be the price someone's willing to sell you the land. And the range was huge. So some properties, again, if the zoning was like a large holding with perhaps like a resource zone on it, that land is worth a bit less in the assessment. Whereas like a commercial property, like a mall or multifamily is valued quite high because you can obviously put it to different use. So you can see here the range kind of went from $250,000 a hectare to $2.5 million a hectare. So that's a huge range. But the average was about 800,000. And when we were talking about this in our senior team, we figured to purchase land, 5 to 7 acres, you are probably looking at kind of around 6 to 10 million, depending on, where the seller is at and what kind of zoning is currently in place. So a little bit of a ballpark, but not obviously that accurate at this point in time. So another thing that is very critical, I think, if council wishes to pursue this project, is determining how we're going to continue engagement. And so we said at the very beginning that there would be ongoing public consultation throughout this entire project, from kind of its inception all the way through to site selection, to scope definition. Then we also have formal requirements at some stage. There's referendum requirements for borrowing. And then, of course, you want to consult people all the way through in terms of what the operational programming looks like, what the actual facility itself looks like. Is there artwork in here? What does the landscaping look like? So we've fully recognized that there needs to be an ongoing, continuous dialogue with the community that council would obviously be leading. Some of the things that we have not been able to do because of COVID include our more traditional formats where we would have an open house or some kind of a town hall, and everyone would be invited to come and chat with council and look at display boards. So we think pretty soon, hopefully sooner rather than later, we actually could start doing some of those things again. To date, we have done, I would say, our best given the limited ability to gather. There's been a lot of virtual workshops and things like that, but I think most of us would agree there's not really a good way to replicate just getting out maps and writing on walls and doing the stickers on the pieces of paper and things. So certainly there's a lot of different options, and what I would suggest is if we are moving forward with this project, that staff would come back with an engagement plan. And I think it should and probably could be a hybrid where some of it is done in-house and then some of it is facilitated, because there's some benefit to having experts lead those sessions, and staff could focus on things like surveys and consultation through our web portal and things like that. Okay, so Obviously, again, today, this is a committee of the whole, so there's no requirement or expectation that there be any decisions made today. But I think we do need at some point some direction from council on whether we're proceeding, whether we're suspending for a period of time or, a set period of time until council tells us to start back up again, or whether at this point we're looking at just canceling the project for now. A couple of different things will have to happen depending on the direction there. So if we are proceeding, staff would need to work with the direction from council to come up with a budget and a work plan, and then we would be needing some consultation support and some professional support from folks like architects and things like that. So we would be looking to do an RFP in the next little while and get some of that consultant support. If we are suspending, we would recommend that we carry forward the balance. We do have some funds that were allocated to the site condition assessments, about $100,000. So we would carry forward that till next year and wait for council direction. And if we are canceling altogether, then we would just reallocate that money. We do have some projects that we could reallocate the funds to, the contaminated site project, for example, where those qualified professionals could actually just take up some other work with the balance of those funds. So if we are proceeding, again, this is in committee, so there'd be a recommendation to council, and staff would need some direction from council, some more discussion to identify essentially the elements of the plan moving forward. And so just to remind or go over what we talked about, that would be defining the scope, giving us some direction on the siting criteria, considering what we would like to see for the engagement plan, talking again and confirming budget and resources, so both internal staff resources and then contracted qualified professionals. We would want to talk a little bit about timelines, especially with referendum. We need quite a bit of lead time. And at this point, we don't see any way that this would tie in with the election coming up. And then we also need to think about how we're going to engage best with the RDN as our governance partner, and then with senior government, depending on the siting as well. There could be approvals and permits needed from the province. So we'd want to engage with them very early in the process if that is the case. And that is a summary of where we're at today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think, as the CAO has indicated, this is a very complicated process. And I think the first thing we've got to put out there is that all we're doing is looking at the variables right now. We will not make the final decision. I've always said that right from the word go. We won't be making the decision. The public will be making this decision. I think the best thing that we can do is come up with what our best recommendations are and then put it out to the public, have public meetings, have discussions on that, and then see where it goes from there. And then just keep forming and cuddling and making things happen until we get down to the final form, for which we're then prepared to go out for a referendum and vote on costs. There's so many different decision points that we have to look at in here. But I think the very first one is we have to come to an agreement on what we see as this, because you can't pick a site if you don't know how big the site's got to be, if you don't know what you're going to put on that site. If you're just going to put a swimming pool, that's one thing, and it may take 2.5 or 3 acres at that point in time, maybe a little bit more than that. Not that I'm not talking about parking or anything, but I'm talking about the size of the building. And then if we're going to put a whole complex there, then it may need 5, 6, 7 acres. Don't know the answer to all those questions, but I think what we need to do first off is decide what is it that if we've always been pushing towards a complex with the swimming pool and with the other facilities that we've talked about along the way, but have we changed our mind on that? And I think that's open for discussion. I also, the last point I want to make before I do open this up for discussion is that there is quite a long list of things that we need to get to. I don't expect that we're going to get to that, to each and every one of those points today without cutting conversation short. I think this is too important. I would like to let this not be time constrained, but let's take each subject as we go. If we get to the end, great. If we don't get to the end, then we'll pick it up and go to the next level at another meeting ongoing. I just want to make sure that we all get our say on this and that we have a good all-around discussion. So I'm going to leave it at that point right now. I think the very first thing we should do is take a motion to receive the CAO's presentation, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Councillor Chandler, second by Councillor O'Brien. All those in favor? Fair enough. Now for discussion. But let's start talking about the scope. Councillor Chandler, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Worship. Just had a couple of comments. Talking about the scope of the project, I would think that, we obviously want to have the full package, where we can have a complete center. If I could, am I able to just go through all my things real quick?
Can we just keep it to the idea, the basics of a scope to start it with, and then we'll just keep moving our way through it, if you don't mind.
Sure, that's fine. Okay. So ultimately I would love to see the full package going. I'd also like to see a full size, Olympic size, if we can make that happen as well. So thank you.
Okay, very fair enough. Councillor O'Brien and then Councillor Fraz.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just dealing with the scope at this particular time, I think it's important that we consider the project as if it's a pool and or including multiplex and room for expansion as well. So that's very important for site selection. So that makes the site selection so that all sites that get thrown into the criteria here could accommodate either just a pool or either pool with multiplex. Whether the multiplex goes forward at a different time, at least we've had the forethought to plan for expansion. So scope, I think that would be important for us to just determine that to help us get with our site determination. And I think today we should probably look at taking all the sites that were suggested by our CAO and look at those. And I think what we have to do is we have to drill down and look at see which ones of those accommodates as much as what I've just said, is going to be okay for that. And then maybe come up with a 3 sites type of thing, 3 sites that would fit that criteria. And then staff had suggested before a matrix. Your term was a matrix selection or a weighted matrix selection. It takes me a while to get the jargon going here. And it's a weighted matrix selection. So for those that are listening anyways, it's whereby as each site, as we drill down, gets weighted independently from our staff, which are very capable, to look at a site and say different for the different, what the cost of the site is, what the, as Kiva had mentioned anyways, what the services are of the site, the walkability and so forth. So it gets weighted to a point where we can actually say, here's what these sites are weighted to. And then we can engage with the public, say, here's the 3 sites that will work. Here's all the conditions, including what the cost would be, which it could definitely affect, the success of the referendum. So the public would have those knowledge, but we need to define it a little more, I think, and that weighted matrix as suggested by our CAO, I think is an excellent way of doing it. So I think that's where we've got to kind of go to stay in the scope of it right now. Let's drill down and see if we can make some decisions and get it down to say 3 sites.
Okay, let's go back here for a second. Councillor Fraz, I'll pick up with you in just a second, if you don't mind. The concept here is that it was the scope was the first thing, not the particular site. Because if we decide right now, hey, we've all sat and heard what everybody's saying, and all we want is a 50-meter swimming pool, then we can look at X. If we want a 100-meter swimming pool by itself, then we need to go to Y. And if we want a 100-meter swimming pool with a multiplex, then we need to go to Z, okay, on it. So the purpose here is just to, if we're all in agreement that we want to continue on the same plans that we looked at or the same concept as what we looked at before, just at least for the conversation, and go with a multiplex and a 50-meter pool, then we can jump right to the site because that eliminates a lot of the discussion. But if we're just looking at a swimming pool, that changes the requirements dramatically. So anyways, having said that, Councillor Frass.
Thank you. I guess there's two questions I'm going to answer here. One is as far as I'm in favor of the proceeding, the direction that this question is asking as far as our scope. I do think proceeding with this, giving staff the direction is the way we should go versus suspending or canceling. And as far as the scope, as you mentioned with the HDR architects, the site plans that they've shown us before, the draft plans they showed us before, I think that's the appropriate size to be looking at. It was a 25-meter pool in their plans with a multiplex, some multi-rooms in there. But at the same time as saying that's the size I think we should be looking at now. I think as Councillor Brian mentioned, leaving that room for expansion, I think is very important. Because when I look across nearly every community that's done a pool, expansions at some point down the line come about, as we're seeing it with Ravensong as well. And so I don't want to see us pick a spot where we can only accommodate exactly what we built this time, because it doesn't future-proof us then. So I think as far as the scope goes, what we saw previously it was on target for me.
Okay. Councillor Wilson.
I have to agree with everyone. I think that we need to proceed for sure. And I would probably say the pool and multiplex is the more important rather than, I'm not sure about co-locating future municipal infrastructure, but as far as the scope, as we see it right here, the pool, multiplex, and yes, Councillor Fraz, I agree with his statement that HDR did make that very clear to us, that we will probably need to expand on those facilities. So we need to think of that when we choose a site. So from my perspective, yeah, I'd say we do proceed.
Okay. Thank you for the answer to a future question and to this one. Thank you. Any other conversation on this? My choice is that I would prefer to stick with the original size pool and the multiplex and continue forward with that. Councillor Chandler mentioned about going to the Olympic size pool, and I know we've got that. And boy, if we could afford it, and if the costs were similar, I would say that's the way I would want to go. The problem is HDR made it very clear that the cost to build it is almost twice as much, and the cost to operate it is almost twice as much because of the ongoing, well, just because of the amount of water and everything that's being used as an ongoing operational expense. So if money is no object, then I'd say Olympic size pool is the way to go. But we know that that's not the case. So as much as I hate it, the idea, I'd like to go back to where we were. Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, because I do agree with that. I don't see us frivolously spending millions more. I guess what I'm thinking is as we go through this process, we may find more and more friendly government monies federally and provincially that may allow us to do something like that. So I think we want to keep it in our scope of thought, because we may have that money fall in our laps too, and may make up for that. Just a thought.
I love the way you think about that. That would be so nice if we could get it and the whole thing paid for. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree somewhat on the scope decision, but I want to clarify that I'm in favor of looking at the scope of the full package for the pool and multiplex for consideration for site selection, size selection anyways at this particular time. I don't want to be focused only on the scope saying we're going to build a pool plus multiplex. I want the options presented with the pool and or the multiplex. I want those to be determined actually by the public, but the public can only make those decisions. They can only tell us what they want if they know what the costs are going to be. And if the costs for a pool and multiplex are so high that it's going to offend the public and they're going to not vote for this referendum, then we've just wasted a whole bunch of time and money for nothing. So the thing is that we have to have the ability to say to the public, this is what this is going to cost. Do you want to have this much of a tax increase? So if we're talking scope, I think we have to determine that. But for discussions today, we don't need to determine whether it's pool or multiplex for site selection. I think that's kind of what we need to go after today. So I don't want to say that we're definitely going to have pool or multiplex because everything's so construction costs are so high now.
Is Councillor Patterson on yet or no? Okay, because I don't want to go without her having her say, but since she's not here. All right, I'm hearing around the table, no disagreement that it's right now we're looking at multiplex and swimming pool. I understand what Councillor O'Brien's saying, and I can't say that I disagree with him or agree with him. We don't know what that is and whether it's in one parcel or two parcel packages. That's a discussion that we can come up to later. But if we're looking for a site, and that's where we're going to end up going with this, then let's look for the site to build both of these on, and let's not confine ourselves with a 2.5 acre or 3 acre site if that's the case. Would that be a fair assumption by everybody? I think that's kind of the way we're going. I'm getting nods from everybody. All right. The interesting part will now be, there's a number of, there was some really good recommendations from the public about sites. There were some that that had obvious problems that maybe people weren't aware of at the time. But when we're looking at sites, we get down to the size of properties within the city of Parksville. That starts to limit us more than anything else because we don't have a lot of free vacant land right now. So we need to look at that. We need to look at what we do have, and if that's in an area where we want to go, and if it's the price, we'll have that conversation as we go. But I think getting down to, I don't want to pick a site, I guess is what I'm saying. I want to pick 2 or 3 sites. I don't want to get more than 3 because then it gets very, very confusing. But if we can pick 3 sites and then take those out to the public and say, here's what we've got, and here's why we picked A, B, and C. And yeah, the weighted staff's recommendation towards weighted site selection is a good one. I like that. And then we can say, hey, site A is 20 points, site B is 15 points, and site C is, and these are what the costs are. So I think we've got to help the public along with all the information they can have before they start to make the decision on this. So do we have can we put the map up again so that we can, sorry to do that to you, Amanda. There we go. So I think those are the sites that have been talked about. We can touch on them each one individually if we like. First one is I'm assuming that's the Wembley Mall site, the first one on the left, my left. Then the next one is at the corner of Pym and Old Island Highway. The third one is the one in the center and up towards the newer, can't very much call it a new Island Highway anymore, but at that end, and that would be at the corner of Despard and the old in Alberni Highway. The fourth one is, of course, the community park, and the fifth one is in the industrial park on some land that we have there. It's a brownfield at this point in time, but that's to enter into the conversation later. But those are the 5. So if we can drop 2 of the most obvious, then it becomes a whole bunch easier for our conversation. But let's go around the table. Councillor Chandler had his hand up first, so we'll go for him.
Thank you, Worship. So I'd like to just throw in 3 and just a couple of comments on each, if I could.
Please.
Does that work? Okay. So firstly, my first comment would be, as long as it's feasible and as long as everything comes back nice and juicy from the report, then I would think the community park, just being able to combine a lot of our entire recreation into one zone. I like that area because what we could potentially do is build on that parking lot site, the gravel parking lot, a little bit beyond there. And encompass things like the skate park in there as well, and you know, a direct path through to going across and connecting up with volleyball courts and the kids' playgrounds and things of that nature. So that would be my first choice. I think, you know, parking may become an issue in some cases, but in a lot of cases, a lot of people are, we're trying to promote walkability. A lot of people drop their kids off at the park, and for purposes like that, for swimming classes, things of that nature. So I do believe that might be a good location. Secondly, my second choice would be PIM and 19A. I realize there's some heavy costs to the land there in respect to buying and purchasing that. It's not city owned, but I really like that PIM property. I think it's very centrally located in a sense that there's a lot of community around it, a lot of community built all throughout. So I like that as location too. And I believe that's got 11 acres on it. The only thing is there is a little bit of sensitive eco issues there with some heron nests and things like that. So that's the only thing I know of there. And then thirdly, I would think the RDN is running the arena, but we would place that location as well as the pool location. And I think that'd be a good tie in there as well. So those are my three comments, my three choices. Outside of that, I don't see the other locations necessarily working. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. My thoughts are on this is that I agree with Councillor Chandler that the community park really has so much going for it, as far as you know, the walkability and central location and so forth. The only addendum I would like to put to that is I'm thinking with the existing parking lot that we have in the space around the curling rink, that we're somewhat limited. I would suggest strongly anyways that we look at the community park with a possibility of purchasing a portion of the land adjacent to it, where Surfside has. They're currently using for storage of their RVs and so forth. And so allow that site, but with the addition of a strip of land anyways, that would just make it so much easier for us to accommodate flexibility in the sizing of the project or future expansion. So that's one of my thoughts anyways for community park, just to include that Surfside property. My other choice would be the Tuan Road industrial site in the industrial park. I know we have applications in for brownfield restoration for that particular property. I particularly like that site because it's so big and it has lots of room for expansion. And at the same time, and we own it, and we don't have to pay any money for that. So that's going to keep our costs down, so we could put more dollars into the amenities and the facility itself than tying it up into the land. With brownfield restoration, it says contaminated site on it. It's just that it may be contaminated. We don't know. We know it was a town dump until the consultants get in there and tell us what's in there. We won't know that it's necessarily contaminated, but let's say possibly. And for the third, I'm just going to throw another total different option on the floor right now. Parksville Elementary has always been a great site anyways because of the fact that it wasn't identified on our map here because we thought we ruled it out. But just to throw it out there, it's a 10-acre site. It would easily handle the expansion and so forth. But it would be in a different format. It would be in a format of going into a partnership with School District 69. School District 69 have indicated that they're going to be looking for more space for further classrooms because of the expansion in their student overflowing at Springwood and so forth. But it would be a consideration of going with the school board, and actually it's with the province, as you know, because the province owns property. But it would be just a matter of just having a conversation with them to see if there's any way that we can go in collaboration with School District 69. On the Parksville Elementary site, because it would be a great site. It's possible, and it's rather vacant right now. And they're going to be looking at it for some form of expansion. And so if we could do accommodation, expansion of school district classrooms, as well as a pool, I think that would be a good partnership to at least explore.
Any other He hasn't put his hand up yet, so I'm just asking.
Sure, I'll speak. Wow. Well, one of the first choices I always had was the community park, way, way back. It was always my first choice, but I'm not leaning so much towards that. Some of the criteria that concern me, and I've heard the public comments about Wembley and being near the rink as, you know, is a great tie-in together. But I think that highway access is important, or access is important, whether it be highway or not. So when I look at these sites, one of the first sites that come to mind, and I'm just looking at it strategically, is the site up on number 4. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry. Alberni Highway. In that, it's the most central to all the sites. Comes off of the highway. It's very close to the other site that we were looking at. It's very much surrounded by residential. I think walkability is very important, but we don't own it, unfortunately. But it would have great access from many directions for people. So looking at it just from accessibility, it would be accessible to many people. Love the community park, but I think that our CAO has pointed out we may have some environmental concerns, archaeological issues, whatnot. So as much as I have always loved that site, I wouldn't throw it out. And if it could be used, I mean, it could be a fabulous site, really. We could have an extraordinary multiplex there. Once again, we've got access. I guess it's okay. It's still very central. The other one I would look at, just because we own it, and also because I think it could make a great brownfield restoration, is the Tuan Road site in the industrial area. Once again, your access from the highway. So it is at the other end of the spectrum from Wembley. So yeah, we don't have all of the residential out there for sure. It would probably require a good bus service or a shuttle service, but it could make a spectacular revitalization project that, as we've seen, there are a few around that have used brownfield sites, and they're pretty good sites or pretty good projects that you can build on them. So that's sort of my feeling. I would probably choose those 3, but accessibility for me is really important, I think.
Councilor Press?
Thank you. I have to say Councillor Wilson's opinion on these sites is probably the closest in line from what I've heard and how I feel. When I first thought about this pool, the community park, to me, it brought up such a vision of this amazing pool that would be oceanfront, like, you know, none other that you see anywhere else. But then the more thought that I was put into it, and when I started hearing other perspectives of it, realized that because the community park has so much going on there, that I think more is not always better for it. And the congestion down there, as well as issues with like floodplain mapping that goes on and water table down by the little beach, I think could create issues with maybe getting the provincial or federal support if there is any funding there, as well as just it starts to put a lot into a small space, and it may be workable, but then I wonder what the future potential in 20 years, if it leaves us any room for expansion or addressing needs that it might come up in the future. For me, the spot that I consider personally as being a home run is the Alberni Highway at Despard there on the corner. For many of the reasons that Councillor Wilson mentioned as well, I think geographical reach of our pool is going to be very important for our entire region, not just for Parksville. But the distance that it lays it out from Ravensong, for example, it doesn't bring a pool within just a couple kilometers there. It starts to access a whole nother demographic of people from the News to Arrington to, and having the highway access, as well as being the entry to our community, I think makes it a prime spot. Having the dual road frontage access too, I think helps with congestion of that you would find at a pool during swim times of lessons or change outs after school and so on. I think those are really important too. And as well, if we are going to get any regional partnership into it, having a spot where it's going to serve those other communities best as well, I think is going to find the most most buy-in in there. On top of which, when you're looking at synergies for the community, while we're looking at a pool right now, our role is to also look out for the future of Parksville and our all around our community. So I can't leave off the table the fact though that we do know that there are needs for our city that are going to come up in the future. Like we've heard about things like a police station down the line, going to need to be a new police station coming in. And if we set ourselves up where we can ease that pain from the future because we pick a site that can, kind of two birds with one stone, I think that's going to serve us very well. So those kind of synergies there are very important to me. The cons that I see with that site, when I try to think about the worst case of it, is one, the uncertainty of it right now. Two, it is a treed site. So there's that, environmental aspect, but it doesn't seem to have any glaringly obvious sensitivities to it. So I think it's reasonable to see that it could be one that we could develop on. As far as the Tuan site goes, that one I think has some potential in there as well. But again, with the brownfield, it's kind of an unknown. We don't know what that's going to cost us or if it's viable at all. It might be a dead end, but it might be something that we can move forward on. Other challenges I see with it though too is it doesn't have great accessibility to the community as far as like for walking to, crossing the Orange Bridge, which is unlit with no sidewalks on the side of the road. It means that people would be limited to either having the vehicle access or taking the limited transit that might get out there. So to me, it just leaves too much uncertainty to I think it could be a good backup plan, but it wouldn't be my number one at all. So out of the sites that we've seen here, to me, the Highway 4 and Alberni is really the only one that excites me. And the others seem to have a serious compromise for them. And mainly for the other ones out by the Wembley Mall is the geographical location is, I don't think is the right fit for it.
Thank you. Thanks all for your opinions from all of you, because everybody's made some really good points. I'm just going to go through them one at a time for mine. And from a geographic perspective, from a wow perspective, the community park is probably the site. But the downside to that is so monumental in the fact that, first off, we're going to be digging the best part of a 25-foot hole in what is going to be a huge water situation there. I think we're way down below the water line in that site, and it's going to cause excessive construction costs to do that. Secondly, on there, by taking up the equivalent of, even if it's only 4 or 5 acres, and that's probably where it would be, 4 or 5 acres, we're cutting into parking that in the summertime, in the peak periods for that park, that is when we need those 4 or 5 acres for parking, and we're not going to have them. I hear what Councillor O'Brien's saying about going next door to Surfside. I actually approached Surfside when we first started this conversation and seeing if they were interested. Sure, they're interested, but the price tag back then, before we started going through this huge escalation of prices, was astronomical. So I have no idea what they'd be looking for now. I have 2 choices, but I'm going to talk to Ton Road, because Ton Road, I don't care if it's a brownfield or not at this point in time, because we don't know the answer to that, and we can find that out pretty quick. My concern is a 10 or a 12-year-old kid walking from downtown across that Orange Bridge through the regional district areas with no sidewalks all the way out to the swimming pool, or the parents having to drive kids out there, or riding their bikes, or for just the regular population to get out there. It means you have to drive or take transit out there. It's not a convenient location from that perspective. And that is the thing that it kills it for me. I'm hoping that we find something really good for that site, because it is a beautiful site that could be in the near future, something we can work with. And I do agree with Councillor O'Brien in the fact that we got to find out if this is, if we're just thinking that it's contaminated and it's not. But contamination isn't even playing one slight part of my decision to rule this out. It's accessibility and on it, and that it rules it out. The two sites. My first choice is, and has been since we walked away from the one further down the road, is the Alberni Highway and Despard site. There's 30, I'm looking to the CAO, 30 some odd acres in that parcel in total, in 3 parcels. Yeah, it's a huge piece of real estate. And no, we don't need all of that land, but nothing says we can't subdivide it off and put in affordable housing, put in condos, put in whatever we want in that area. I mean, that can be all taken care of at a later date. But, and the front part for us, and then we could always, as Councillor Fraz says, we could always look at, okay, in 5 years from now, when we have to start to look at a place to build our new police station, we've got the land and it's exactly where they want to be. So it works out there. It's 2 birds in 1 stone. It ties into the 5.5 or 6 acres that we own that run parallel to the railroad tracks and would adjoin actually this piece of property. So it would increase the size of this property even more. It is in very walkable, accessible area to most of the residents of the city of Parksville. If you look at it, it's all within probably a 10-minute walk for the most part. So that's a good one. The one that we always, and quite honestly, on my part, I always was told that it was part of the regional district of Nanaimo, but the land immediately adjacent to the arena is not part of the region. It is actually in the city of Parksville, and it's 4 acres or so of property. That sounds like, well, that's too small. It is if we had to use it as the only parking lot. But if we work a deal just very similar to the deal that was done with the arenas and build on the land there, and then make a deal with the landlord for the Wembley Mall and use their parking lot as well as any excess lands we have, we may be able to make it. We'd have to see by doing the site plan, but that's not a bad spot when you look at it. You're certainly, as Councillor Fraz points out, you're in that in the section to French Creek and to our populations in and around there. We're 5-minute walk from the high school. Where there's a lot of upsides to that. And, I think the developer might be, or the landlord might be interested in having those conversations. So for me, Alberni Highway is the number 1 choice spot. Number 2 would be the Wembley Mall, if we can fit everything on there that we need. And then actually all the other 3, I can't say I'm jumping up and down in any one of them. If I had to pick one, if we got right down to it, then Ton Road would be my 3rd choice on this one. But gosh, I don't want to see kids walking over there and trying to get over to the swimming pool. So I just leave it at that. So we go around the second time around for anybody that wants to add points to this, but I'm not sure where we go from here. But any other comments? Councillor O'Brien kind of hesitantly put his hand up. All right. Councillor Wilson, he's passing it off to you.
All right. I've looked at that Wembley as well. The concern I have with Wembley is the size of it and the access to it. I just think we could have tremendous traffic jams up that way.
If I could just interject for a
Yeah,
second to think
do,
about, because
please.
I've thought about that too.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. That in the old white spot access, that was horrid.
Right.
And that's what probably contributed as much to white spots. Not getting-
So where are you thinking
But they
then?
have the lights are at that inner,
Yeah.
just past there, and that would probably be able to come right into the site. You'd be able to continue the road right into the site from those lights. So it would be accessible from that side and from the mall parking lot. And again, without sitting here and having the plans sketched out, or at least a feasibility study done on the site, it's just all kind of eyeballing it. But I think you could make it accessible. just if I could, just
Yeah.
the part that I was thinking about on this one is if the region, for some reason, and maybe they will take over the operating of it, or we work a deal out with them. Think about why wouldn't you just take that building, the swimming pool building and the multiplex building, and put it right against the or against the arenas? Because you've got that second floor with all the offices. You'd have office space up there. You could have access from both buildings. I mean, there's a lot of variables that you could start to cover off on that may offset the downside to it. I still happen to agree with Councillor Fraz that the number one spot to me, and I think it was you as
Well,
well.
it was, yeah, I
The number one
mentioned that.
spot.
That
there
is my
still
number
best be
one.
because it's accessible for more of the population. But I think there's a lot of good on Wembley.
So back to the Wembley site.
Yes. go.
It's one that I've heard a lot of people say they'd like it, and it makes sense from a family point of view. You've got different activities up there. But I'd have to see some kind of traffic study or whatever to see how, or whether you could even add on to the arena. Can you go up from the arena? I mean, is that possible to add the multiplex somehow on top of the arena? I just, right now, I'd have to see that laid out on a piece of paper with HDR putting that pool and multiplex on there and show me how it would really work. Because I am concerned that it's way at the other end of the city. It's much closer to the Qualicum facility, which I just don't think it covers off for enough of the rest of Parksville. But, and of course, it's the one on number 4 highway, I think is the best bet right now. And yeah, Tuan Road is far away. However, I hear what you're saying about the kids walking, and that's obviously a big concern. So there would have to be some sort of continual bus service, I think, or some way to get families, kids there. Yeah, it's awkward. It's going to be awkward for sure, but I don't think there's any one site. And if you think about Qualicum and where they've located their pool, it's off of a highway. I mean, that's the access they have. So I'm right back to, yeah, it's the number 4 and probably Tuan Road I can see as the alternate.
Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Fraz.
Thank you, Your Worship. The only comment I have about the Wembley Mall situation is it's much like the community park. It's so overused at times. When I was watching tournaments, the hockey tournaments, when my grandson was playing up there, the hockey tournaments, they completely filled the parking lots. It was just crazy. I mean, it was great. It was such a huge families and everything just going in all the time. So that is already a well-used parking lot. I would think it would be difficult for us to actually have a chance of using that same parking lot when they have events. So that's my problem with that. My problem also is with the fact that Wembley Mall is the exact extreme opposite end of which would serve our Nanoose residents if we're participating with the electoral districts as well. They're at the far end as well. They always complain that they didn't want to pay into Ravenshaw because it's so far away. Well, this one isn't much closer. So the thing is that it would be a detriment to Nanoose. They probably wouldn't be too happy about that site. But the Alberni Highway, I hear what you're saying, and I like that site. Is just for the sheer, you look at it on the map, that's square in center. It's right beside 2 thoroughfares. My only question to the CAO is on the assessed value comparison chart we have here, Kiva. Does that start at underneath the second bar there? It starts at 150 Despard Avenue and then 230. Okay, I just want to make sure that, yeah. So there's about 4 or 5 parcels in there. Yes.
If I may, Worship, there's a few different parcels, but I think the caveat on the assessed value for that one is that it's currently a resource zone with a 4 hectare minimum. So they would assess it based on the ability, like you can't subdivide it less than 10 acres. It's kind of an agricultural zone. So the difference, if you compared that to, say, the Loblaw site, that's going to have multifamily zoning. It's going to have a much higher assessed value. So that's the caution about the assessed values and the market values. If the city was to change the utility of the site, then you can't take that one to the bank, but it is, I think it's 4 separate legal parcels. One at the front is 5 acres, and then the other 2 are very large, like 30 acres roughly.
Thank you. So being resource zoned anyways is for basically the timber value that's on there. So, right. So what that site has going for it is the fact that it is definitely a great location. The only other thing is, has anybody talked to the owners? I know it's all owned by one parcel. Is that, do they already have plans on it? That they have plans that they want to do something totally different? Is it strictly a holding property to them? Like we could define that as the best site of all and find out, say, well, we're not interested in selling. So do we know that there's a possibility of a sale here is what I'm getting at?
If I may, your worship, we would not approach anyone without direction from council to
Yeah.
do that.
Oh,
So
okay.
no, we have not talked.
Okay. So that it's not a sure thing. Even if we like it, they might not. They might have other plans to put up a really a really big
tree
farm, a big tree farm,
If
a
I may-
Christmas tree farm.
Yeah, if I may,
Okay.
your worship, we can double check and see. I'm sure they may have participated in the OCP process.
Yeah.
So we can check our records, but if council wished, then obviously, and we had direction, we could reach out and ask
Yeah.
if that's even a possibility. But at the moment, these are all totally conceptual. We have not talked to any of the private owners at all.
So I would definitely add that to a very good possibility for my choices. I'm kind of backing off of the community part now, just from the sheer volume of people, as Councilor Francis pointed out, it's already too successful as it is. But and then the only other comment on Tuan Road industrial parkland in there that we own, in reference to the kids and so forth. Remember, with this wonderful new Rath River Trail connection, when we finally get this up and running, we'll have very good, safe, accessible from there, which is going to go right to Rath River Trail, which is just across the street from exactly the site, which will have controlled intersections that's being designed right now, as we know, from MOT. So the thing is that would be that, and also to address the transit. Transit already goes right through there. It actually stops on 19A going through there. I'm sure it would be much more feasible to be actually stopped on Industrial Way. So we could make sure that the transit, I'm sure they'd be very happy to move and take the route down there, but they already are right on the route for transit. Thank you.
Councilor Francis?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to add on some comments. I agree again with Councilor Bryan and Wilson regarding the Wembley Mall, the congestion out there, the kind of access to it. But also when you think about the kind of events that, or the recreation that takes place with the pool too, quite often you see people then walking or riding their bikes afterwards as well. And it's one of the big strengths I think that Ravensong has is the nearby field and trail network that they have right behind there. And so I think having a pool or a place where then people can recreate beyond just going swimming, where they can go out and do their walking and that. And so the Despard one gives it access to the trails down at the end of Despard too. So I do think it would be valuable if out of this committee of the whole, if we can give that direction to council to get staff to pursue asking the question to see if it is something being available. As well, something that strikes me too is question then to our CAO. I remember last year we had, or sorry, maybe it was even the end of 2020 there, we had gone through a list of public members to form a committee around for some input for the pool. And maybe at this point in the conversation here, that now that we're kind of going back around and seeing how, if we should proceed or suspend and so on, we might want to make a recommendation to council as well to activate that committee and get some input from them. Because I know that they have some people who have worked on pool projects before and probably have some really good input as far as what is needed in a good location to be able for the viability of a pool, so that you can have the right amount of membership turning up for it or access for kids and so on too. So just some kind of thoughts that are rolling around in my head here, and turn that back to council. But I think, we could, if we could activate them somehow or see if they're still interested in being part of this conversation.
Just a couple of points. Transit, you're absolutely right. We can put transit out to there and we can do it. Of course, there's going to be an additional cost because every hour that our transit system operates, the region bills us back for it. And so we have to be cognizant of that fact. So there's an additional cost there. One outweigh the other. If we put the pool out on Despard and the Alberni Highway, are we going to require additional transit out that way? I don't know. And we shouldn't be making our decision based on that only. So I just push that out there. The thing about the Wembley Mall is it's, as I said earlier, it's my second choice. But I think what we need to perhaps do is, if nothing else, just do a sketch up of the site and see how it lays out there. And you know, maybe we're going to find out, hey, it just doesn't work. It's just, you know, Maine was as crazy as ever trying to think about this one. But, you know, maybe it will work. I don't know. Maybe we can, you know, the idea of parking being an issue out there. Yeah, for sure, the way it is right now, but I don't know what it's going to look like when everything gets put together. And that's the part that we need to focus on, as to what the end result will be, not what we think it will be. So, you know, even if we just had some site sketches done up with the facilities laid out there in block form, just so we can look at it and say, this works or this doesn't work. I think that makes at least a little bit of sense, so that we can say we've done our due diligence on all of these sites when it comes out to it. I think when we get right down to it, for the most part, I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, by the way, I'm hearing that, you know, the Loblaws site, although nobody's ever never talked to Loblaws, but to find out even if they want to sell it, it's not zoned. It's zoned as single family residential. And I remember 12 years ago when they tried to put multi-family in there, there was a hue and cry from every neighbor in the area, and it was because of the amount of traffic that it was going to create, and so on. So I think we have to be cognizant of that, is that this could be a very interesting conversation if we tried to put the pool there. And we do have a significant amount of wetlands right smack in the center of this. Councillor Chandler was living just across the street from it, so he's aware of it. So, you know, that I haven't heard anybody here say that was the site they wanted to go to. So I think we would I be safe in saying that one could come off the table without an awful lot of discussion? Okay, fair enough. Then what about, let's go back to the community park for just a second. We've all had the conversation now. We've had some points drawn. Has anybody changed their minds on this, or at least started to see the errors in their way in picking that site? I'm just joking, but you know what I'm saying. Is there differences in feelings on this? Go ahead, Councillor Chandler. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I couldn't tell that was directed at me. No, I still hold fast on that area. I do agree there's going to be issues with parking, and there could be some potential scenarios that would be a bit more compressed than we like sometimes, but it always works out. No matter what we seem to build and where we build it, what we build turns into a very usable space. And I'm not sure why it always does, but it could certainly be, if we looked at the entire area, there's lots of places where the building could be put, and there's lots of places where the parking could be on either side. You know, I think looking at a separate entrance there where you go into the park by the softball diamonds, the pool entrance would be beside the curling club and going down that way. So you could divert some traffic that way. I think that would be part of it. You know, is it perfect? No, but it's also, it's owned by us. And I think, you know, when we look at the total costs of doing business, that may be a factor. It could be a $4 or $5, $6 million factor for what we're going to end up paying for that other piece of land there. So I'm just not sure what we're dealing with in that respect yet. And even if they're going to sell it, but the reason I didn't pick Despard right away, just because I knew it was going to be a very heavy cost. So don't disagree that it could be, as you know, my second choice was PIM. So I will now divert my third choice as Despard. So if that makes you a happy guy. So, thank you.
Going around again, any other feelings? Councillor O'Brien?
Sorry, thank you, Your Worship. After hearing everything that I've heard speak, I still want to discount Wembley Mall because I just looked at the site here, everything, and that would limit us to any future expansion at all to the area. And Councillor Frass brought up a good point about the fact that if it was the Alberni Despard site type of thing, that it does back onto very good walkable pedestrian and as well bike paths around Springwood. And I do agree with what he's saying. After going for a swim type of thing, it's kind of nice to jump on your bike and go for a ride or go for a hike in the area. That Alberni site definitely has the potential for that, as well as Tuan site also has that because Tuan backs onto Top Bridge, which is a huge myriad of trails and dog walkers love it, of course. But the thing is that that's a huge area there that is great for outdoor recreation as well after going for a swim. So having said that, I'm moving my 3 down to Tuan Road, Alberti Despard, and Community Park.
Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Wilson?
I think the community park, you could build something fantastic up on stilts. You could have a wonderful view going down the highway to the ocean. It's all possible. You can engineer anything you want, but I don't think it's a good choice for many of the reasons that Councillor Frass said, that it's going to be, well, and also our CAO, we've got some environmental issues here. And I think that as much as we own it, and I agree with Councillor Chandler, it's beautiful. I wanted that site too, but I think there are too many issues with that site. So really, I could only choose 2 sites. And once again, it would be the Despard site being number 1 for all the reasons that everyone's mentioned, and which my first and foremost is it's dead center. It's so accessible to everyone from all directions, through neighborhoods, from the highway, has everything going for it except we don't own it. And Tuan Road, I think Councillor O'Brien brought up a really good point that with the new Rath Trevor Trail where people can ride, especially kids could actually make it there. But I just don't see getting there as much of a problem because I think there are transit services and parents for the most part, you know, people do drive to pools. So those are my 2 sites, one being number 4 highway and the other being the Tuan Road. I don't really think I could choose 3.
From 5 to 2 is what I'm hearing is basically where everybody's at, save and except Councillor Chandler over there. But I just a point on the school site, because Councillor O'Brien brought it up, and you know it is a great site. There's no doubt about it. We could go swimming here at lunchtime, and it would be an easy walk. But the reality is that we have approached them at one point in time, and they weren't interested in selling. They wanted to do some kind of a partnership where they had first dibs on the uses of the pools during the daytime and that kind of thing. That was the first, but the most important one is HDR cautioned us, and they're the architects and the engineers. They cautioned us that for whatever reason, the equipment on the roof of the swimming pool is exceptionally noisy, more so that I remember having the conversation with them, more so than even the arena compressors and so on. And you're right in the neighborhood of all those single family dwellings right in behind. And I think that might cause a revolution. We'll have our own blockade in the downtown core if we did that. But I just wanted to address, those were my 2 thoughts. And they did talk about 5 acres at one point in time, but that would mean we'd have to push it right back in even closer to the residents. So I leave it at that. Councillor O'Brien hasn't brought it up again, so I'm assuming that we're back to looking at Ton Road, Despard and Highway 4 and the community park. Would that be what I'm hearing? The three? Yeah. Well, I'm hearing, well,
I wasn't, sorry, your worship, I didn't hear you. The first one you said, could you repeat? repeat the
Despard
three?
and Highway 4 is number one, according to the most number of positive and affirmative votes here. Ton Road as an alternative, and the park is still on the table from a couple of people, but I mean, that'll still go. If we did do that, we'd certainly want to do exactly what we did over on the other site on Despard, is start doing some, start dropping some holes in the ground and find out what the water table is there, and find out what the building would be. And it's going to be, I think, scary if we do that, but that's regardless, we can do that. And for $20,000 or $40,000 to have that done, we could probably get that done.
Thank you, worship. If I can make a point on the community park, we just had a really good stormwater master plan just drawn up, so we know where the water levels are and we know what it's going to take to remediate it. So if it would take remediating or locating the pool in such a way that it's not going to add to that. But I agree wholeheartedly, but we have those plans already done for the stormwater, so we know where the excess water is. As I don't know if it actually shows groundwater, what the water table looks like at any given time there. And we don't want the swimming pool popping out of the ground next time it freezes, but then we get that one that Councillor Wilson wants on stilts. So, but yeah, I think it's worth looking into. My only suggestion, worship, is that takes us down to 3 sites. But what do you, can we run that up the flagpole and see if
That's where I'm going with it.
yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. Councillor Wilson, you got your hand up for something?
I'm down to 2 sites, unless we choose another site.
Down to 2.
Maybe we can go with the RDN site along Corfield, perhaps, and see if they want to sell, but no,
Yeah, that's
I think what's-
agricultural land.
no,
It's
I
ALR,
realize that.
it's ALR land. I would
I'm-
like that.
I know it might make a good site. I don't see the community park working as much as I love it. I really do love it. I just don't think it's a good idea, and I just don't think it's going to work. So I see 2 sites that we have right now, unless we start going outside of our boundaries.
Well, and that.
And then I
nothing says
think
that. We'll
personally-
get to that part of the conversation
Right.
in a
Okay.
little bit, but.
So I'm down to 2 sites.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chandler and then Councillor Fraz.
Thank you, worship. Yeah, I was just going to say, it'd be great to look at some other additional data and see. I did have some look at some of the comments in the Let's Talk Parksville, but it would be great to sort of encapsulate all that as far as just specifically who thought where would be sort of the top choices. I'd be really curious to see that, although they don't know necessarily what we've chosen.
That's right.
So that's not really a fair thing, but it'd be interesting to see how many people did pick the community park and elsewhere if we knew that. So thank you.
The only thing I would caution on that in my mind is that without saying these are our 3, it was easy for people to pick sites all over town and look at that. When we bring it back to the public in the very near future, hopefully, we say, here are the 3 sites that we're looking at. What do you think from that? I think that's when you start to really get it down. Okay, so otherwise we will be all over the place again. I think once we've decided that there's 3 viable sites, then we can go. We're looking at it from a technical point of view. Let the public come back with from the residential point of view, if you will. So Councillor Fraz.
Just going to say, as far as the site selection for the 3, I'm fine with those 3, including the community park in there, recognizing that I do think there was only really 2 contenders out of those 3, but for the sake of eliminating some and picking the top 3, I'm fine with those 3.
I would like to have, and I'm with you. I think we're all kind of heading towards those 3 being the 3 to at least to look at. But the one on the community park, scares the bejesus out of me with the water situation there and everything. You know, the drainage may not be the same as dropping, 40-foot boreholes down. So I think we need to look at that. I'm not suggesting we do that if we can pull the information that we have already got, if we can take it from that and say, yes, this is what's going to be required, or this is what you're going to need to do to offset it, then we have the information. But if we don't have it in the master plan, then I certainly would like to spend the extra money. I don't like to spend the extra money, but I think we have to spend the extra money to see if that's a viable site. Okay, otherwise we're just wasting our time. We're wasting the public's time if we can't do it there. So I think it would be worth the investment if we don't in fact have the information on hand. If you have the information on hand, go to it. Let's go from there. Is that Councillor O'Brien?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I agree. The thing is that if we take the 3 sites that we've chosen, including the community park, as Councillor Chandler's pointed out, I also checked the lead stock and quite a few comments from the public group. Why not the community park? Why not the community park? If we include it in one of our 3 here anyways, the staff are going to provide a weighted matrix as to the good ones or not, and it will say right in the top, the community park, as has been pointed out, could have groundwater problems, and it could be space problems and so forth. But at least the public will say, well, at least they looked at it. They looked at the obvious that they said, they engaged with us and they said, why not the community park? Well, we're going to look at it and say, well, maybe it can be the community park. So I think that that's a good way. Let the staff come back with the real info.
The only other question I'd ask for staff is to review the forefathers agreement and find out if in fact we can build a building on that property, because there may be a restriction on what we can build there. So, I'm not suggesting there is, but I remember there are commercial properties you can't build there, whether they consider pools, and let's look at it and see. Okay, fair enough. All right. What was the next thing you wanted to know?
Sorry, Your Worship, could we pass a resolution to pass this information to council? Just this particular information to have council decide to send it.
We can do it formally if you wish.
Yeah.
It was going to go there anyways
Yeah.
for the next meeting. So
I'm just, is that what committee of the whole, we're just here to make recommendations to council. So I thought, but I know you just want to go on the next one, but I think now that we finalize this one, let's get it down and send it to council.
If I may, Worship, so there was something from the previous discussion too. I was just making notes, and can do it either way that council wants, but we had the site selection discussion and there was some consensus that I was going to suggest you might want to recommend to council, and then we could add this one so we can either do them one by one or all together. Because
Well-
the previous discussion was that for site selection purposes, that council's committee would recommend to council that they choose a site large enough to accommodate the full scale multiplex and pool with no commitment to building it all right away if that's cost prohibitive, but to allow for future expansion opportunities. So that was kind of your first recommendation that I heard. And then this second recommendation that I was hearing is that staff be directed to do at least a preliminary technical assessment of the top 3 sites being Tuan, Albernia, and Despard in the community park, and report back to council.
yeah,
Those are the two.
to answer Councillor O'Brien's point, I was just going to wait until we got through the
Yeah,
whole
we can do it
thing and
either
then
way.
say, this is all going to go to council at that
Yeah,
point in
so
time, but
I'm
we can do
keeping
it.
notes.
We can
for
do it.
Whichever
as
way
we-
you want.
Well, that's fine. If you want to do them one at a time, we can do them one at a time, but I'm fine with it.
So if I may, then do you
Somebody's
want
going to
to,
make a resolution.
do you want to make a motion for those two, for the 2 items I just read out? So the site selection, you basically pick a site big enough for future expansion, no commitment that you're going to build everything right away. And the second one was the top 3 sites. I think that in-house, before we spend any more money, staff can do a somewhat, at least a preliminary technical assessment. We have some information that might just eliminate 1 or 2 of them for you before we spend more money.
Okay, but let's just put if we're going to do this, do it right. Okay, go ahead.
Question is to our CEO, on that, when you're talking about doing some technical assessment on it, would that also include reaching out to the owners of the property, see if they're interested in selling type thing? Like, I know that's not, is
Yeah,
that
we
what you're
cer-
capturing in that?
Yeah, we certainly
Yeah.
could do that if that's
there's
the
only one.
direction. It's still, yeah, the one
Yeah,
that we
in
don't
that
own.
regard, yes.
Yep. we
Just
can,
making
yeah.
sure that is captured there. Thank you.
Yeah. Counselor O'Brien.
And my only point to the CAO, wouldn't your first suggestion, number one, about the sites like, or the size of the site, that really becomes a redundant, because we've actually narrowed down the 3 sites that we've done. So we've actually, in our own heads, have picked 3 sites that allow for the expansion of a multiplex and So I just believe the first recommendation is rather redundant. And just go with the second recommendation to propose the 3 sites.
If I may, Your Worship, I just offer a couple of comments on that because the community park, in terms of expansion, that will not be possible without relocating something or probably removing a building that's already there. So I think it's still probably valuable for council to have that recommendation that if we come back and say, like, there's just no room to go any bigger if you put in, say, a 7-acre facility into the park without moving things. And the other option is that there's 3 legal parcels on Alberni. So I think it's still helpful for staff to understand that we're not going after the 5-acre piece, for example. We're going to be looking for portions of the other properties. So I guess it could be somewhat redundant, but I still think it's helpful, discrete direction from council to.
It doesn't hurt to be there, is
Yeah,
what you're saying.
Yeah, because
It's fine.
Thank you for that follow-up. Thank you for that answer, Kiva. And I agree, thinking about the Desperado Bernie site, the community park site, I was hoping to also include the fact of possible expansion. As the mayor has mentioned anyways, he's already checked with them to see with it, but it doesn't hurt to ask a second question, say, we only want this much portion, what would it be? What would be the price on that? That's how we'd get the community park expansion. Thank you.
So if I may, just to clarify, so the recommendation from the committee to council, which will get clarified from council as well, but is basically to include reaching out to both private owners, so Surfside and the other owners, to see if there's a willingness to sell whatever amount of land it is that we need.
In a ballpark at the price point.
Well, they may not give us the price point at this point,
Well.
but we'll see what we can get.
All right.
Okay. Could we make that? Or
You're
could we
the
make-
one that's making the motion.
Yeah, I would like to make the motion for both of those points as presented by CAO.
Seconded by Counselor Fraz. All in favor? There you go. Counselor Patterson. I don't see her. Okay. I'm sure we'll hear if she comes online. All right. What was the next point that we were looking at?
Sorry, if I may, Your Worship, it's really up to council, how
Or
far
just go down your list.
you want to go, but
Go down your list. One more.
the next thing we had scope citing, where's my engagement plan. So this could wait until it goes to council as well, but this is how council wants to work with the community. And it might be easier, just thinking kind of out loud as I speak to this, it might be easier for us to come back with some options. I know our manager of communications has provided a list of all of the things we could do, but it might be easier if they're in a report. So that the report to council could do the technical analysis of the sites and then have a fleshed out engagement plan. So it gives you something to actually kind of yay or nay, rather than just generically saying, yeah, engage the people and have it in person. And we could actually spell out, exactly what that looks like, if you wish. And then if that would be all right, the next one is budget and timelines and RDN's role. I think these could probably be the next phase of discussion, but it's up to you.
Let's talk about the RDN for a second, because that's always the elephant in the room. Go ahead, Councillor O'Brien, you had something. you wanted to
I
say.
just had a question to the first part, if I may, Your Worship, to what Kiva just mentioned. When you talked about the engagement process, you're talking about the engagement process to have the public participate in the site selection, right? And I think that's probably, if you could flesh that out at the same time with this other information, that would be really appreciated. Then we can get some engagement with the public as well. And with the site selection, it's easy enough to do in the survey form, because of our distancing and everything else. So it could be done in a survey form, and we can get as much participation from the people emailing in on that, and that would be quite simple. So I appreciate that suggestion. If we go ahead with that. Sorry, your mayor.
If I may
I,
too, Ed.
just to follow up on that 1 second, if you would, Councillor Chandler. I happen to really like what Councillor Fraz had suggested earlier about the committee. Now that we're down to 3, let's gather all of the technical stuff that we have, the information that we have, and then let's see if we can put it to a committee, not us. Let's let the committee talk to it. And then when they've come with their input, then we can take that directly to the public. Okay, so we've pulled ourselves right out of the site selection at that point in time. We've narrowed it down to the 3 sites that we think have some potential, and then we can let the committee look at it. And if the committee looks at it and they say, hey, drop that one and keep these 2, then those 2 go to the public for input and for feedback. I think that's the fairest way to do this, and it's weeding it down as we go. That to me would be the way to handle this. Go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. I think that it is important for staff to provide that technical information so that people can properly engage.
Yes, I agree with
And
that.
so I think what we would do is, if everything gets recommended to council, we would come back to council with the preliminary technical assessment from staff with the information we have available. And we would at the same time refer that to the committee. We do have the folks are kind of standing by waiting to have something referred to them. And then in that report, we would outline the engagement strategy and the engagement plan that would include the committee, and it would include different points where the public would be able to either send comments to the committee or send comments to council and just be part of that. And then we would try to figure out where the best place is to put in things like surveys and open houses or town halls or other committees of the whole, or whatever we think fits in. So I think you have to have something technical for people to actually be able to meaningfully engage.
I think we may be saying the same thing, and if we are, I apologize for not being very clear on it, but what I'm suggesting is that when the technical information is gathered by staff, then it goes, you can give it to council, but I would prefer if it went directly to the committee and let the committee sort through that information and make the decisions from there. And they say 1, 2, or 3, or all 3 can go public. But I mean, we've now narrowed, we've done what we said we were going to do. We got it down to the 3. Let the committee make that recommendation. That's what we suggested from that committee all along, was they were going to make those kinds of decisions. We don't want to be involved in the decision of this. We've always said that it's going to be a public decision here, not a council decision. That's my view. Councillor Wilson and Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you. I'm wondering why our CAO seems not happy about this decision.
If I may, Worship, I need to work on my poker face clearly, or put my mask back on.
No, I was ignoring it.
I just think that we have to go through council before we refer to a non-elected committee. Council doesn't have to comment or try to sway the committee at all, but I think the proper process is that we would bring it back to council and give you the opportunity to provide, either outline questions for the committee or provide some guidance, because if the technical information comes back that one of those sites isn't suitable, you want to be able to weigh in on that. So that the process to me is that it comes to council and then referred to your committee after that.
All right, I've got Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Fraz, and Councillor Chandler.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Your Worship. I'm not in favor of the committee at all. The committee, I know who was chosen, and I was chosen to study the possibilities of the Springwood Despard site of the original one, where we had all the extra studies done as well. That's why we're bringing in a technical committee, and that's who these individuals are. They're technical. A lot of them don't even live in the area. So the thing is that I'm not in favor of a committee like that at all. I'm more of in favor of going to council first, as the CAO suggested, and then it moved to an engagement process with the public period, like we did on Let's Talk, only in a more formalized affair. But I honestly, I do not see the need for that committee at this stage of the engagement process.
All right, Councillor Fraz, Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Mayor. the advantage I see with having that committee though is giving them, and ahead of that report, council weighing in on it, is it allows us to hear what their recommendations might be or what their thoughts around this. And not just for the, and maybe that committee has to be kind of tweaked for as far as where we are now versus where we are when we put them together, because there was some pool expertise on there, and a committee isn't the one to make decisions at all. And that's where I don't have any fear of them having a review of technical information and giving their input. They're simply going to make a recommendation to council and provide that, we heard like a second sober thought towards it, or a different perspective. I think they have a lot of value they could add to this kind of conversation we're having now, which is why I agree with the mayor as far as we get those technical reports, have it go through a committee, they make the recommendations to council, and we can hear if the reasoning is sound or not too, but at the same time, it goes to the public as well, or after the committee goes to the public as well, so that we hear back from all sides. I think we should be doing that before we make a decision on it. That way we're getting as much information as perspectives and opinions on it. So I totally support it going to committee, but yeah, if we do need to rejig it, maybe what their purpose is, or just kind of touch base with them and let them know where things are at now versus where they were before. But they do have a lot of expertise, I think would be valuable input.
Thank you. Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, I don't see a problem with involving the committee in some of the feedback. Obviously, I think the more feedback we get, the better. I understand where Councillor O'Brien's coming from, though. So that committee was formed for a specific reason, and so it might not give us what we're actually looking for, but you never know. But one of the things I wanted to mention is I think that we've got a real opportunity coming up, and realizing it's February 17th or whatever it is today, we've got engagement and some things that are going to be happening with the public over the next little bit, some questions. I think one thing we should really try to capture is we have an opportunity during the election, realizing we're not having a referendum, but we can really gather some really solid information potentially from all the people that are coming out to vote. We're going to have a large percentage of our city at that, either one of the 2 or 3 locations. I think we could maybe set up a little open house type structure or information package that they could take and sit down, potentially. Just a thought. I thought it might be something. It could even be part of something that's not done by the staff, but it could be a committee type thing too as well. So I realize that's extra work. I'm not trying to add that.
Yeah, she's going to put her mask on. First off, I don't think you can campaign while the election. Even at that, I don't think you can do that. And they're okay. But having said that, I understand what everybody's saying and concerned to this. Okay, but the technical side is the important side. Hopefully, by the time we get to that point, we're going to have some maybe preliminary feedback on the Ton Road site that says, "Oh my God, it's so polluted, you're never going to get it done," or "There's nothing wrong with it." All of those technical things that the public don't know about. Okay, we can't rely on people making those decisions without the technical expertise. And the group that, if I recall, most of them that were on there, yeah, maybe they didn't live here, but they all had a varying degree of technical expertise on things that we're going to need to know before we can go to the public. And so fair enough. If you think we should be coming back to council and bringing it as a report, but what I don't want us to do is say, "Oh yeah, well that's great." Then so we're going to go with the community park and not give the public a chance to do it. I think we look at the information, we say that's nice, and pass it on to the committee. Let the committee go through it, and they come up with their questions as to what needs to be done. And then once that's all done, then we can take the 3 sites to the public and let the public express there, now that they know all of the aspects of it. Okay, yes, it is contaminated. No, it's not contaminated. Yes, it is here. No, it's not there. Whatever the case may be, they can then make a reasonably informed decision or comment based on what is provided to the public. And I think that's really important. Just to leave it out there, you're going to have the people that know everything about it because they learned about it on Facebook, or they're going to have the other people that know absolutely nothing about it and don't want to know anything about it. They just like that site better than this site. So I think it's important that we have a middle step in here to have the committee review it and then pass on their comments and expectations at that point in time to go to the public. What I want to do is just keep us out of the decision-making process from here forward, which is the way we've always planned it. We always said we weren't the ones that are going to pick the final site. The final site's going to be picked by the public. And the public is going to pick it based on the comments or a portion of their picking will be based on the technical review. And then the rest will be on the social review that, everybody will bring to the table. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have a problem with the committee reviewing the 3 sites. I just don't want them reviewing it and saying this one is better. I want them to review it and impartially just make their comments on it that can form part of the staff study as well. I have no problem with that at all.
Okay.
But I don't want them coming back and saying, community park is no good for such. Let's just tell us exactly what the problems are or the technical aspects of each one of the site, but not make a recommendation. Just give us a technical, and that's part of the staff's weighted matrix and so forth, and that we can then we can send it to the full public.
Yeah, I think
With your technical aspects
Yeah.
included as part of the report.
has to have the technical
Sure.
side of it in order to make an informed decision.
Sure, that's
So
fine.
I'm
Yeah.
in agreement. So we're going to go to straight face. So, but the way I'm hearing everybody at this point in time is we're going to go to the technical or have staff draw up their information, give it to the technical committee. Technical committee, if they require any more information, then we can look at it from that point. But it also has to come back to, as you say, you'd like it to come back to council as a report of some sort. Should it come back? Here's a question for you. Should it come back as a report before the technical committee gets it or after the technical? Because I would like to see what they've got to say about it as well. So
If I may, Your Worship, I think the best process is that this committee recommends to council what we talked about. So the site criteria, the 3 sites. Staff then go, if council agrees with itself, then staff will go away and do our technical in-house review. It might be preliminary. We might have to recommend, at some later date doing scientific studies with qualified professionals. We would then put that report on an open council agenda. And at that time, the recommendation from council would be to refer it to the committee. It's already out there in the public at the same time. So any interested party doesn't kind of get bumped till the committee's done. And then 6 weeks later or whatever,
I'm fine.
everybody would come back to council. So in that time, it gives the public the same opportunity to provide you with input or comment or ask questions. The technical committee will be off doing their thing at the same time. And then eventually all of that will be collated and brought back to council with lots of different input. There'll be technical input, there'll be gut reaction from people, and then there'll be the social and political side that you guys would weigh, and then we'll move from that point. Ideally, you would be then narrowing it down to 1 and then moving to the next phase, which would be kind of the design and that sort of aspect of it, with more public consultation on that as well.
All right. I think we're all now around to saying the same thing. I think we're in agreement with that. Thank you for your guidance on that. That's why you're here. All right. So if you want to make this as a motion, we can make it a motion that that's the way it's going to be handled. All right. We'll leave it to you to draft the motion. Is that what we're going to make a motion on what you just said?
Yeah, if that works, then
I'm fine with it.
it was long.
Councillor Fraz is making the motion, second by Councillor Wilson.
Okay, thank you.
All those in favor? Unanimous. All right. I want to just have a quick conversation, pardon? Yeah, because we're getting closer and closer as we come on to this as to what the fork in the road, if you will. And the fork in the road is, does Parksville do this on their own, standing out in the field by ourselves? Do we do it as part of the RDN in the same format as what the Raven Song is done. You know, we need to look at that. I'm not asking for a decision now because we don't know what this decision is, but I want everybody to think about this as we're going along. You know, they've already got their whole operation in place. They've got the lifeguards, they've got all these things. Whether they do it efficiently or not, that's a different discussion altogether, but the format is laid out to do this for them, for the Raven Song, and to add another pool would be a fairly reasonable thing to do in my mind. But, or we can take it on ourselves and say, no, we're going to handle this ourselves. We are looking at somewhere, and I mean, I hope it doesn't get quoted exactly, but I don't think our budgets are all that far off. We're in the $50 to $60 million range if we do a complete process, but that doesn't let us off our responsibilities for Raven Song. Okay, that's still there too, and we're spending. Oh, it's more than that this year. Yeah, but no, the old one, the operational expenses about 900,000 or 800,000, something like that a year that we're spending to keep as our share of Raven Song's expenses now. So, you know, that would still be on the table, and, you know, we're going to have to work our way through that. So all I'm saying is that if we do it by ourselves, we've got that plus the full nut to crack on our pool. Okay, or we can just be put into the pile where E, F, G, and H in Parksville and Qualicum Beach share up the costs of the Parksville swimming pool. Okay, so those are things that we're going to have to look at. And we're going to have to make a decision fairly soon because we can't keep plowing along here and making all these decisions without involving the RDN if we in fact think that we should be bringing them on board. So I'm just opening this up for discussion is what I'm doing here. So Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Fraz, and then Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Worship. From that perspective, I agree 100%. I believe there's not a chance that City of Parksville can do this on their own. In as much as we're already, as you say, we're already contributing to the Raven Song pool. To be fair, it's only fair that they contribute to the Parksville pool, that being Qualicum and all the other electoral districts. I would suggest that once we get past this little engagement that the CAO has got on her plate now, is that we actually have a committee of the whole meeting with the RDN representatives, the Recreation Division, Mr. Osborne.
Oceanside Services Committee.
Yes, that will be the exact, yes, yeah. Oceanside, well, or it'll be a
Staff. Sorry.
committee
It's
of
got to
the
go
whole.
to staff first, but go ahead.
Sorry.
Well, I think I was just wanting to clarify there, Councillor Bryan, I think is talking about inviting the RDN staff, not the elected officials at the
Yes,
Oceanside
yes,
Committee.
yes. So,
Okay.
So I'm inviting the RDN staff to make a presentation because there's so many questions about how the referendum gets formed. And if it's including all the electoral districts as well as Parksville, Qualicum. Also what the costing looks like. They have a lot of experience and so forth. They can give us ballpark costing to talk about, you know, in order to ensure acceptance for the referendum. I think that they have a lot of information, and also they're very familiar with what grants can or may not be used. I mean, we use a formula, third, but that's not a given. So the thing is that I would like their perspective of what we could expect because they've just gone through it with Raven Song, of course. So I like the idea of having them here because let's pick their brain. They have all that information on the recreation. But I think that could be the next step before we go to fine tuning on, you know, what color the trim is going to be on the building. You know, we need to have this conversation first. Thank you.
Councillor Fraz.
Thank you. Just want to say I'm really proud that Parksville has taken the initiative to start looking at a pool. And I do know that it will serve the entire region. We all know that there'll be usage from outside here. There's no community pool that only is used by their individual community. Regionally, pool services has been suffering for a long time, which is why they're looking at doing an expansion. And it takes a long time to do a pool project. The Raven Song expansion 4 years ago, they were looking at doing it and had plans in the works and so on, and they still haven't got to the referendum stage of it yet. So it does take a long time, which is why I'm proud that Parksville has taken the step of considering a pool, making the move forward. Otherwise, we would just be years behind, even further behind when the time comes that our vastly growing communities would be suffering from a lack of pool again. Because of that, we have been taking regional considerations. And in fact, there's been discussion today about the geographical reach that our pool has and access for other communities. And I do think it would be very valuable and important, very important for us to invite the potential regional partners in to hear their considerations too, regardless of if they're going to participate or not. I think we should get some of that feedback from them, particularly because now the way it is with Raven Song, bringing on additional partners like Area E into it, which is happening. Part of the things they say is, hey, we didn't get any input, so why should we have to pay after the fact? So regardless of whether they're going to be partnering up, let's invite them to partner perhaps, but also invite them to open it up for further considerations. And whether that steers a little bit of how we position our pool and the services there, I think it's going to just serve our entire region and ourselves much better for in years down the line.
Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, some very good points from both councillors there. Thank you. And I think the other thing too is we want to have the RDN fully involved because of the opportunities of the monies that they have available through their various grant process as well. And I mean, the combination of those two grant scenarios would be more powerful than what we can achieve by ourselves. So it's just a comment, but it'd be good to have them totally involved, obviously.
The grants that just to clarify, the grants that they would get would be the same grants that we would get. They don't have access to it any more than we do. The upside to it is the fact that you're bringing in E, F, G, and H, Qualicum Beach and Parksville into one pot and being able to split the costs a little bit more. Okay.
Yeah, but that's kind of what I was getting at. But in relation to though, I know when we're talking about grants, we're also talking about overall population as well, correct? So that would up the dollars in that respect.
Yeah,
Am I wrong?
We won't know until we know what the final price tag is on this, and then they will have to come through with it. They're going forward now with the discussions on the expansion to the swimming pool, $20 or $30 million worth. And the assumption there is that there's no grants coming in. But, you know, if grants become available, then obviously they're going to apply for it. That would be the same approach that they would take with this. And you know, that we can't do that. If Parksville were to go alone, if we had to go out and finance $50 million or $60 million, right, the whole amount, that would be a huge nut to crack on the swimming pool for us. I mean, it would put it out of, I would almost guarantee you we wouldn't get the public to buy into it at that point in time. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 is usually where you look at. And if you can't get that, then you move on to something else. You know, okay, so I think we do. I think it's important that we bring them in. And I agree with Councillor Frass, his views. Even if we don't want to bring them in, which I'm not saying we don't, but even if we didn't want to bring them into the package and as part of the team, it sure doesn't hurt to listen to what they say. Maybe they're going to say something that we never thought about. And at least it's going to give us some more food for thought before we go out to the public and we have all of our bullets loaded in the gun. Let's make sure we've got it all covered off.
So as for that, your worship, then could we not do that with the OSC, the Oceanside Services Committee group? Like the engagement that Councillor Frass is talking about? Is that how we could engage that?
Well,
it's exactly the partners we want to engage
Yeah.
with, right?
I think what the CAO is suggesting or had suggested is, first off, you want to have the staff in and let them wade into, well, you're going to need 42 lifeguards and you're going to need 27 of this, and it's going to cost you that much.
Yeah.
Okay, the operational side of the business. Okay, and then when we got all of that, and they're going to say, you know what, it's going to cost $3 million to operate that swimming pool. And I'm just picking numbers out of the sky, but $3 million to operate that swimming pool. That's when you go back and you say, all right, E, F, G, and H, and Qualicum and Parksville, it's going to cost you this much each to operate this in addition. So yes, to answer your question, go to staff first, get their operational input. And then once we've got all their operational input, then we go to the Oceanside Services Committee for a presentation to them and saying, this is what we want to do. Now, if they want to come to some of our meetings, I think it's a great idea. The more people that come to our meetings, the better it is. But let them come to the meeting, or we will go to the Oceanside Services Committee meeting and lay it out on the table saying, this is what we want to do. Okay, so it's just a sequence. Councillor Fraz is absolutely right. This whole thing about the expansion on the swimming pool started, I'm going to say 8 years ago. It started to get serious about 5 years ago. And I'm guessing that we're still probably, if we don't do anything in Parksville with a swimming pool, we're probably still 2 years minimum away from anything at the pool. This is a long process now, a lot longer than any of us thought when we first sat in these chairs. So anyways, that might be the next, once we get the technical side and we get it narrowed down to where and then we can start getting a price on it. That's maybe when we bring them in a more formal scenario for staff. Let's bring staff in first. Okay.
If I may, Worship, I think that's a great idea. And I think that the CAO and Director or GM of Recreation can advise council on how best to engage the political level of the RDN reps. It may be going through the Oceanside Committee, it may be the whole board. I don't really know their preferred process. So we do talk very regularly at the staff level and have great partnerships there. So I know that they would be certainly more than happy to come and meet with council, whether it's at a committee or a workshop or whatever, depending on what kind of information you want from them. It could be a combination of both of those as we move through the process. But yeah, I'm hearing a lot of eagerness actually from the staff at the RDN to be playing a role in
And
this.
E and directors from E and G are both very positive about this swimming pool idea here. The other directors, I mean, if you H, that's almost like saying, why isn't E part of Ravensong? Is the distance factor that it doesn't affect it. But let's take that route on it. I think that makes the most sense. No, I think we're pretty close to getting to where we wanted to be.
Yeah, if I may, Worship, I think we have a lot for the first phase, and then we can come back with some more information. And as we say, this is going to be an ongoing iterative thing.
Yeah, can we put it back together? The last week of March is the next step. By that should give staff some time to start doing some stuff.
If I may, Worship, we'll have to see what, for us to do the technical information, we're gonna have to bump off some other projects. I'm not sure about the timeline.
Because we're also going to need to talk about budgets.
We have a lot of budget stuff going on, yeah.
We'll do that at council.
I would actually say the technical stuff probably won't come back to council until April,
All right,
but we'll do our best to get it to you before then if we can.
all right, let's start from there. Let's work our way back. All right, well, no, go, it's fine, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, we're gonna call an adjournment here in a second. All right, go. All right. Anything else? Anybody else? Anybody wants to bring up on this part? I think we got a lot to chew on here. So let's go from there. Pardon? Sure, go ahead. Yep. Councilor Fraz wants to know if you guys have any comments since you've hung in here all this time. Okay. Did we surprise you in any way? Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Now that I know who's sitting over here, because I didn't recognize him with the mask on. Norm, do you have anything?
Well, I'll reflect the comments of Kim. highway. If you build it on there, we don't get any revenue out of that. It's wrong. Townhomes, condominium, whatever, that comes, they come straight from the state. That's the only one comment on there. Nice to see the progress starting to go forward, move forward. We're taking a look at the site selection, getting pretty at what's now. Hey, we're going forward.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Ju-
I apologize about the morning.
I have the same problem. The last meeting, Counselor Wilson gave me hell about my phone ringing, and then today I noticed hers did too. Yeah, but anyway, just to address your concern, because it's a good one and one that I certainly thought about, because dollars mean everything, or as much as, yeah, but there's 30 odd acres of land there, of which only 5 to 10 of it will be developed for the swimming pool, but the rest of it would probably, putting a swimming pool there or in a recreational facility there would create a much more, a much larger impetus to develop the last 20 acres, which may not get developed now for a number of years. So that's at least hopefully where it would go.
On that particular point there, future development.
Thank you.
And it's also connected, right? Basically, transit. But actually, now we're
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? But yes, and we happen to own, I mentioned that during the meeting, that we happen to own 5.5 or 6 acres along that runs parallel to the train station there that we looked at for putting in a co-op housing program at one point in time. So, but yes, there's so much possibility, and it's the last large piece of real estate that is not considered ALR land. So in Parksville. Well, you know, we're at the end of the meeting, so it's a good thing. I don't mind listening at this point. Any call for adjournment? Make a motion. Counselor Chandler, second by Counselor Fraz. All in favor? Passed unanimously. I got a unanimous decision of the council. Good. We will be.